coming to you from Austin, Texas on this cedar and pollen-ridden day. It's Color Commentary, and we are Adrian Guarzales.
And Michael Petchik. So how was your week? You weren't at F&M, so we're just going to do a week recap.
Very allergy-filled. I've been taking decongestant, but I apologize. You'll probably hear me sniffling like Trump a little bit here on this podcast.
Yeah, we're one of the allergen capitals of the country.
And you know what? I've never had allergies this bad, and I've lived here for about 8 years. And Liz, my girlfriend, told me, it might just be because I've lived here so long. Like now, it's finally starting to catch up. But I thought I was getting the flu like earlier this week. I was like,
yeah, you do sound a little bit congested here. I get the pollen contact allergies, so my skin itches when I go outside, which is super fun for the summer months. But
and to put this into magic, if you were a traveling planeswalker, right, or the world style, if you went somewhere else, how do you know that your body wouldn't just die due to infectious disease native to that plane?
Oh, okay. There we go.
They've never addressed this.
They've never actually addressed how planeswalkers figure out where they're planeswalking to either, which is kind of super bothersome. Like, it bothers me enough that, like, the logistics in selling, like, Star Wars for interplanetary travel is, like, really sketchy at best. It bothers me more that it's just like, all right, just going to jump into this, like, nebulous wormhole place, hope I turn up somewhere that isn't.
They don't even really do that. They just sort of, like, wish themselves somewhere else from what, like, because, like, every time that it happens the first time, it's, like, some traumatic event where they need to, like, leave, and suddenly they're in, New Mexico or something. They on the side of the highway. Like, they don't know how they got there.
Yeah, it's, if we have any listeners who pay more attention to the storyline than we do, if you've got an answer on that one as to how planeswalking works, I'd love to hear it.
Magic has a storyline? I'm terrible.
But I've also been working on my sticker cube and, been taking stuff easy. My wife just got back from a trip, so I've been spending time with her, non-magic stuff, but...
Boo.
All right, let's get into our deck tech.
It's by Scottish national champion Stephen Murray.
Yeah, who produces content over at newmontgaming.com.
The Popper Flophouse is the name of Scottish national champion Stephen Murray's video YouTube series.
So this is a blue-green land destruction deck. He posted some videos. We're going to have a link to it in the description of the video. You should really check him out. He actually plays against 3 Drake decks in a row and beats every one of them, which is...
Dude, spoilers. I haven't seen them yet.
Oh, you haven't?
I mean, yeah, I've seen them.
Oh, but really, really enjoyable. I think that was actually one of the top-rated comments on, like, the Reddit post for it. It was just like, oh, yeah, he wins all of them. I was
that's funny. I don't see 4 of Fairy Macabre in his sideboard.
All right, so this is actually, it's returning to another point that we made earlier on the show. We're starting off strong. 4 Coiling Oracles.
I mean, yeah, that card is gas. I like to think that this show really boosted that card to fame and fortune.
Yep. But again, like just it's a body early. It ramps you or it draws a card. Like, it's at worst it is Elvish Visionary. At best it is a free Explore.
Right.
Then we've got 2 copies of Mold Shambler.
And that's the first of the spicy land destruction package.
Well,
here.
Interestingly, if I remember correctly, Mold Shambler is just a non-creature permanent.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
In this deck, it's mostly going to be blowing up lands, but it does have the utility of it can hit, a Journey to Nowhere that's holding one of your big creatures down. It could hit,
I will say, though, speaking of the Journey to Nowhere, though, it interacts unfavorably with it if you are using it to try and get your Mold Shambler back, because Mold Shambler's, that's a kicked ability.
Yes, it has a kicker. I want to say that the Mold Shambler itself costs like 4, and then its kicker's 3 on top of that.
Yeah.
So it's not a cheap land destruction spell, but it does have utility, and you can play it out early just as a blocker.
One of our local players also uses it as his primary win condition.
Yep.
But he's into the really grindy land destruction.
Then we've got 3 Muldrifters. We're playing blue, and why wouldn't you play Muldrifter.
I don't know, Mike. Maybe because it's gonna get banned soon.
It is never getting banned.
What?
This is just full on like trying to get under my skin mode today.
I know. Sorry. It's because I'm sick, and you should be miserable too.
Then we got 2 Penumbra
And
spiders.
this is really spicy.
Ooh,
Yeah.
ooh.
Penumbra Spider is a card. I think it costs 5 mana.
4.
It's a 4 mana 2/4. When it dies, you get a black copy of it, just another 2/4 token.
2/4 with reach.
Yeah.
That's the important chunk here.
But it's like Death Rattle. Just comes on back.
It's kind of a better version of God. What is it called?
There's a couple Penumbra creatures.
There's a couple Penumbra creatures, but this is basically an upgraded version of Giant Spider, which is just a 2/4 for 4. I think this one is 2 and 2 green, whereas Giant Spider is 3 and a green. So not strictly better, but in a lot of situations better. Then we got 3 Self-Assemblers, which has been putting in some work in a couple of decks. So 5 mana, colorless 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, you tutor up another Assembly Worker creature card.
Currently, this is the only one in the format.
Yes.
Because the only other one is an uncommon.
Yes, and probably not even that great if we could play it.
No.
But important to note, and I definitely got excited about when I first saw this card, you cannot get stuff that has... you can't get non-creature changelings.
Yeah, which is the only really sad part.
Yeah. Apart from that, though, this is a deck that's going to put your opponent behind on mana, and it's got a couple of ramp things in here, so you're going to be up on mana. Having something where you can just dump 5 mana and get a 4/4 with another 4/4 to hand seems pretty good here.
Speaking of ramp, 4 of Sylvan Ranger, the little elf that could.
This one is 1 and a green.
For a 1/1 that gets a basic land out of your deck and puts it into your hand. So not truly ramp, but you're going to be able to get the land that you need when you need it.
Yes. Does, kind of give you fixing on layaway, if you will.
Right.
Like, you got to wait a hot minute for it, but you'll get it. Then 2 Ulamog's Crusher at the top of curve.
The best land destruction spell ever.
Yeah, and a great way to close out the game. Like an 8/8 on its own is just hard to deal with. The fact that it has Annihilator too just kind of pushes it over.
Yeah,
the
so
edge.
like you've been destroying your opponent's lands all game, and then suddenly you have this 8/8 that taxes their resources every turn permanently. Like it's just some good beats.
Yeah. Getting onto some more ramp. 3 copies of Utopia Sprawl. 1 green enchant forest. When it enters the battlefield, you pick a color, and when you tap the land, you get an additional mana of the chosen color. So, it lets you get your blue mana out of your forest. It lets you get 2 green out of your forests. Just generally, getting you towards your upper end a little bit quicker.
And also, in the case of something like Penumbra Spider, if you have an island and a forest out, you could enchant the forest and have it tap for double green, and then you'll definitely hit your Penumbra Spider.
Yeah, so sometimes Utopia Sprawl is just wild growth.
Yeah,
and that's fine. The next one, oh man, hold on. I need a second because I want to try and pronounce this. Monvuli Acid Moss? I think that's right.
I just say it Monvuli. I don't even try and pronounce the W, to be honest with you. But I'm sure you're the one saying it right here. There is a W in the word.
So it's 2 and 2 green. Destroy target land. Then you get to tutor out a forest and put it directly into play.
So it plays such a huge role in this deck where it ramps you and it's a 2-for-1.
Yeah. It puts you ahead. It puts your opponent behind.
Right. It's just a great card.
And this is definitely one of the better pieces of land destruction in this entire deck. Just for that fact. Then we've got 1 copy of Reap and Sow, which is 4 mana with Entwine, 1 and a green, or 2 and a green, I think. And it's the 2 halves of Monvuli Acid Moss split apart. And the Entwine lets you get both of them.
So it's Acid Moss number 5.
With the added kicker of it can get any land.
Okay, that's fair.
It doesn't have to be a forest. So like there's Simic Growth Chambers in this. If you
Right.
really want a Simic Growth Chamber, you can just go get it.
And I actually don't know what Temporal Spring does.
Oh,
so there's 4 copies of that in the deck as well.
So Temporal Spring is a common out of Apocalypse, which was one of the first enemy color sets. And it's 1, a blue and a green. Put target permanent on top of its owner's library.
Wow, that's obnoxious.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to spoil the entirety of these videos, but There's one point where he gets to put a bounce land on top of a player's library
Like sweet
on turn
sweet
3.
mother of Jace.
Yeah, opponent goes land, play a 1-drop, second on the opponent's second turn, bounce land to bounce their land back to their hand, immediately snaps off the temporal spring. That puts you back like 2 or 3 turns.
Yeah, that's dirty.
Yeah.
The next card is an all-star Ice Age Thermokarst. Back when they thought that green and black also deserved land destruction spells for some reason.
Yep.
Thermokarst is just destroy target. I believe it's non-snow land, right?
No, it destroys any land, but if it's a snow land, you gain 1 life.
Okay. Thermokarst is awesome. It's a 3 mana. It's a 3 mana blow up a land. It's brutal and it's short.
And it does have marginal upside in the weird corner cases.
Right. Like if your opponent's playing Snowgo, for instance.
Yeah. Land base pretty simple here.
I actually found this land base sorry, now I'm like getting all tongue tied. I found the land base to be a little heavy. There are 22 lands. That's kind of high for the format.
I mean, part of that is going to be the fact that you don't want to be whiffing on Coiling Oracle too much.
That's true.
Also, just having enough targets for your assorted land tutoring abilities.
Yeah, between the Acid
nice.
Moss and the Sylvan Ranger, that's 8. So,
then you got 9 in Reap and Sow. There's a decent amount of stuff that needs more targets. Moving into the instance, we've got a copy of Capsize and a copy of Pulsamarasa.
The spice.
Yep. So Capsize, as most people familiar with the format know, can just be a hard lock.
Right. And this is a ramp deck, and it's in blue, so it feels very appropriate. Being also like, if you have your opponent down on like 1 land and you keep bouncing it back to their hand, I mean, that's just brutal,
Yeah. There are a lot of decks that can't handle that. And Pulse, return a land or a creature to your hand, gain 6 life for 3 mana at instant speed.
And that is just, and we've talked about this before, that is just one of the most underplayed cards, I think, in the format. It is so good, but it doesn't see a lot of play in type or tier 1 decks.
I think one of the big things as well is Pulsamarasa isn't flashy, and it's easy to miss it as something you might want in your deck.
Yeah, like we've talked about, it's a raise dead plus a gain life spell. It's actually both halves of those are terrible on 1 card, but together, there's something better.
Yeah, it's just marginally good enough. Moving into the sideboard, 2 copies of Dispel help you win counter wars or keep your stuff safe from counters rather. 4 Gleeful Sabotage for Affinity and probably also Boggles, even though it's been showing up less and less.
I've heard Gleeful Sabotage is actually really terrible against Affinity, and people should stop sideboarding
it. Oh, we don't have an agenda on this show, do we? 4 Hydroblasts. Again, a concession for the popularity of Drake.
Right.
Keeping your stuff alive. Also, All-Star against Burn. Then we got 3 copies of Narcolepsy. That's one of those 1 in a blue at the beginning of it's an enchant creature aura. At the beginning of enchanted creature's controller's upkeep, you tap it down.
Right, and it's functionally identical to Curse of Chains.
Actually, it might be that it taps it when it comes into play and it doesn't untap. I forget exactly. It's a soft pacifism style effect, right?
Right.
Then we've got 2 copies of Nylea's Disciple, which is 2 and 2 green for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you gain life equal to your devotion to green.
Right, so, another concession for Burn. And I will say, although Burn is missing from the lists, I do play against it kind of a lot. I think it is still a pretty popular deck.
Well, I think, we've touched on this before. Wizards only publishes a selection of 5/0s.
Right.
So there's like this whole layer of decks that are being played a lot that just can't close out a 5/0 consistently, but they can 4/1 or 3/2 really well.
And there's a lot of cards for Burn here that you could use against Burn.
Or any of the fast aggro matchups either. Stompy can put you on the back foot really quickly. There's plenty of stuff in the format now that can just kind of get you down to 10 or so, and you kind of need something to answer it. But yeah, this is like a really interesting deck.
It's really cool. You should definitely check out the videos.
Oh yeah.
The cost of the deck
Yeah,
is a little high.
$45 in paper, 30 and change online.
Right, and that's mostly due to the Hydroblasts, the Gleeful Sabotage, which I believe you said are kind of expensive now.
Yes, in paper, I think Gleeful at one point spiked up to over $2. I don't know where it is right now. Wunvuli Acid Moss, because it tutors a forest, non-specific, I believe he's playing Modern.
And that RG Panza deck.
I'm looking through the rest of this list. Oh, Utopia Sprawls are like $2 or $3 a piece.
But as far as like value for you and your collection, it's actually pretty good. Coiling Oracle, Moldrifter, Sylvan Ranger, Crusher, Utopia Sprawl, Capsize, and Hydroblast, and Evil Sabotage. Those are all cards you can play somewhere else that, if you invest the money into them now, you can play them in decks down the line as well.
Yeah, this honestly seems like a great example of, some of these cards are a little narrow, but if you like brewing, there's a bunch of really interesting cards here.
One thing that I think we may have talked about a little bit, but you'll see this as a theme where generally the most expensive cards in a deck are going to be Hydroblast or Pyroblast. You're doing yourself a huge favor if you just go ahead and get those.
Yeah.
Because it will just knock like $20 off of whatever deck you're looking to build. Because they are invariably in sideboards.
And they're also just good. There's a reason they're always in sideboards. They're just very good cards.
They're some of the best sideboard cards in the format. Any deck that runs those colors is basically going to be playing some amount of copies of them.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those ones where if you get a chance to pick them up for a decent price, go for it.
I mean, and they are cheaper now than they have ever been, just because they just got reprinted in EMA. So now is the time to get them.
Yeah. All right. You wanna move on to the maybe board this week?
If you're gonna twist my arm about it, I guess. The Gar's Putrid Leech.
Is that supposed to be a leech sound?
That's the sound of me paying 2 life to buff this bad boy to a 4/4.
All right. So it's a green and a black, 2/2, pay 2 life. It gets +2/+2. This was an all-star during when Shards of Alara was in Standard.
Yeah,
it's used to see play in Modern Jund, didn't it? Like, I think it got ported over there. I feel like
it did. I don't know. The card is insane. It's part of it.
It's sometimes just a 2-mana 4/4 turn after turn.
And I think the real thing holding it back, as with all the maybe board cards, is it's a gold card, and all of our lands come into play tapped.
Yeah, it's
just not fast enough.
So it's mitigated somewhat when you're on like a 4-mana gold card, because at that point you've been playing a bunch of lands, and like 4-mana cards don't need to get hurried out a lot of the time. This is one where you really want to be able to cast it turn 2.
Yeah.
That, and we're a lightning bolt format.
Yeah, you can always pay 2 life, and then in response they'll bolt the leech.
I mean, to be fair, the other option is we didn't mention you can only buff it once a turn, right?
Yeah. That's the real drawback.
So they can either bolt it in response, or they can bolt it on their turn and force you into paying 2 life to kind of spell skite it, like in a weird way.
Yeah,
it's
a card that lends itself very easily to getting blown out. And in addition, a sometimes 4/4 just really isn't that threatening when like all of Affinity's creatures are 4/4s. That's a very highly played deck, and it just dies to Flame Slash.
Yeah, just not really lining up well with the format, and I think it's a really again, it's got the common thread of the maybe board is it's got very good raw power level. It's just not easily castable quickly, and once it's there, it's kind of weak to some threats.
And something that I've just thought of, a lot of the maybe board cards, or maybe it's just the ones we've done recently, because I'm thinking of Lightning, Terminate, and now this card, really belong in some style of Jund deck, which just doesn't exist in Pauper, because all of the good like mid-range decks just don't, they're just not really in Jund colors.
Yeah. Also, three colors is just so rough sometimes in this format.
Well, because I was thinking of like, even the Kitty deck. The Kitty deck is playing blue because blue is like the best color in the format, and it's playing white because Core Skyfisher is one of the best creatures in the format. So that's the closest thing to sort of a Jund style deck I could think of, where they just have good creatures, good removal, and some card draw. But the Jund colors themselves are just not really that great as a whole, like combined together in Pauper.
Also, I'm just going to toss it out there. In that metaphor, Icar Wellspring does a very poor impression of Dark Confidant.
Oh, I was thinking of Muldrifter, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Icar Wellspring does suck.
Yeah. But yeah, again, like just kind of filling in that, checking off our weekly quota of gold cards that would be better if we had untapped duels.
Yeah, and I hate that that's sort of what the Maybe board has become. We really need to start looking at some monocolored cards. But the thing is, these cards are so easy.
We got an email recently from a viewer with some suggestions that I will be tapping into shortly.
Okay, good.
So, main topic for today, we're going to talk about functionally similar cards. Not functional reprints, just cards with a similar functionality within the game.
You can get with this, or you can get with that. Or you can get with this, or you can get with that.
All right. Well, let's cut this out.
Mike, having no TV growing up, does not know what I am referencing.
What are you referencing?
It's a Kia commercial with hamsters. You should look it up.
Oh, okay. That's
the look on his face, everyone right now, is priceless.
that was not what I was expecting.
We're gonna watch it after the show.
I thought you were referencing whatever the hell the name of that Fatboy Slim song is with the music video with Christopher Walken dancing in the empty hotel.
Did you think that was my Christopher Walken impression?
No, he's not singing it.
Oh,
He's just dancing.
Right, fair. But yeah, this is a list of cards where they do kind of similar things, but we'll just give you some examples.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with the first one. So Tortured Existence and Grim Harvest are an example of black graveyard recursion engine cards.
Right. One of them is a one-mana enchantment. You know the rest. The other is an instant where it's one of the black. You return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, and it's really the thing that's neat about it has this ability called Recover. For a black and 2, whenever a creature you control dies, you can pay that mana cost and return it to your hand. If you don't, you
exile it.
You exile the card. This is a staple of the Pig Trinket deck. It's the main engine. It's an incredibly good card. Mike has pointed out to me in private, maybe not on the show, that it is the only recover card that interacts with itself.
Yep.
Which is also really interesting.
Because recover always triggers when a creature dies. Having something that gets back creatures with recover on it is actually some really nice synergy. So Tortured Existence is a bit more build around, and I feel like personally I prefer Grim Harvest because Tortured Existence requires you sometimes to run cards that are a little subpar just so you can always have creatures in your hand.
And the big one I'm thinking of is Golgari Brownscale. Most decks that play that card can't cast it. They just use it as a thing to pitch and gain life, which is like, okay, but it's not the most powerful thing that they could be doing.
Because I've definitely seen Brownscale just jammed into like non-green Tordex decks. And, again, Tordex is, it's an archetype. Like, it's a powerful effect, especially like if you have madness stuff to go with it, it can be really good.
I'm actually not really a big fan of Grave Scrabbler.
Grave Scrabbler is an interesting one. Grave Scrabbler, I don't actually know what it costs, but I know that it madnesses for a black and 1, and it's a 2/2. And if you cast it for its madness cost, you get a creature back from your bin. It's got a Gravedigger effect. Yeah.
So the Tortured Existence is better with the madness style decks because it lets you discard things. I remember even black-green Tortured Existence that would play like Basking Rootwalla. That worm card.
Arrogant Worm.
And then like the dog,
Wild Mongrel.
Wild Mongrel. Thank you. I'm thinking of the Tog. I'm thinking of the Tog and the dog, and I'm trying to remember what the dog is actually called here.
I played a lot during Odyssey Block, so those are all familiar to me.
Mike was the dog. Mike was not the Tog.
My favorite part of Wild Mongrel is the fact that it was part of a cycle, and the other 4 are garbage.
I had no. What do the rest of them do?
The blue one is like a 2/2 that whenever I want to say it like attacks or blocks, you return it to your hand at the end of combat or something.
I don't even want to know what the rest of them do.
The white one gets first strike. It's a bear that gets first strike for pitching a card. Like that's
Wild Mongrel's probably the best.
They're miserable.
The thing that's funny too is Wild Mongrel is like half of what Psychotog did.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know, that standard was weird. But I have inclined to agree with you. I think Grim Harvest is objectively a more powerful card. I think Tordex, they can do some powerful things with their creatures, but they have to have the right setup. Whereas Grim Harvest in Pig Trinket is like, do I have creatures? Yes. now I can do this Grim Harvest loop infinite numbers of times, and each one of this will gain me an incremental advantage over the course of the game that I can eventually use to snowball my opponent.
Also, just on another note, Tortured Existence does not fare as well against sort of control decks, especially if they can remove it once it's on the board, and especially if you're not running white in your Tordex build. Like, if you don't have the Oromancer to get it back and they can get rid of it, some of the lists run cards that synergize really well when you have a Tortured Existence, but are kind of lackluster when you don't. That's why we're kind of... You see more of the Tordex builds, at least at our local group, are kind of airing into like the play good stuff that gets better when you have Tortured Existence.
Right, and we've discussed that being a main problem of Tordex lists before, is the deck is not nearly as good. It's like Aether Vial decks. The decks are just not as good if you don't have the 1 mana engine card.
And preferably on turn 1 so your opponent can't interact with it.
Right, and drawing multiples of them is useless. Well, Aether Vial, not so much. Tordex, definitely useless.
Yeah. I mean, it does. If you draw extra ones, you cast them out because no one plays Echoing Calm, the Echoing card that hits all enchantments with the same name.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Ray of Revelation is the only card I could think of that would.
But even then, they're gonna have it sitting in the bin.
Right.
Moving on. The next one is actually an interesting one because Friday I got to try out Blue-Black Forbidden Alchemy. So Forbidden Alchemy is kind of the flip side, or not a flip side, just like a similar card to Mystical Teachings. So Forbidden Alchemy is 2 and a blue. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. 1 goes to hand. The rest go to your graveyard. And 6 and a black for flashback.
And the reason Mike is comparing this card to Mystical Teachings is because it digs you an answer. Granted, you don't get whatever you want, but then you get to flash it back, fill your graveyard. And you mentioned that one of the big upsides to playing this over Teachings in a very similar style of deck is that you rely a lot. You're able to cast your Anglers a lot quicker.
Yeah. So just to remind everyone, Teachings is 3 and a blue. Search your library for an instant or a card with flash.
Yes.
Which is actually a thing.
Reaching Hippocampus.
Is that a common?
Yes.
Oh, huh. But flashes back for 5 and a black. So Teachings is a mana more on the front side and a mana less on the back side. So you flash it back a little bit quicker. You can chain them together much more reliably. The reason I played Forbidden Alchemy over Teachings is it is a much faster style of control deck. You get to power out Gurmag Anglers really quickly. I'm running a 1 or a 2 of Ghastly Demise, which is 1 black, destroy target non-black creature if its toughness is less than the number of cards in your graveyard, which gets very big very quickly. And they definitely go in different decks, although Nathan was there on Friday. He was running Teachings with Forbidden Alchemy in it.
I think that it's fine to run Teachings with a 1 of Forbidden Alchemy. I think that's good.
I was actually looking at the list and I was talking with some people, and I think Forbidden Alchemy, Dimir Forbidden Alchemy control would be served better by having the third copy of it replaced with a Teachings. Because there were a couple games where I saw all 3 of them, and copies 1 through 4 of Forbidden Alchemy felt good. Copies 5 and 6 felt a little anemic, and I'd rather just be able to say, okay, I need an answer right now.
Yeah, and that's the flexibility of Teachings. Forbidden Alchemy, of course, is more card selection because you just get to pick the card you want out of the... How many is it? 5 that you put
4.
Okay, the 4 that you put in the graveyard. Wow, that was way off. 5 is so much better, I feel like.
If it was 5, I would be jamming. I would have jammed this deck a long time ago.
I almost at 7. I was like, no, that's way too many. It can't possibly be 7.
Oh, my God. So one way to look at this is it's a very, very lackluster dig through time.
I mean, it works. And it is good for those reasons that you said. And so, yeah, it would be interesting to see if the Teachings decks sort of evolve more towards
I mean, so if you look at the 75 I ran, I'm running more creatures than the average Teachings deck. I can shave out Pristine Talisman, and you run a slightly different removal suite.
Mm-hmm.
But apart from that, yeah, they still have very similar game plans.
And they serve similar functions in those 2 different decks.
Yeah, they're both the engine card. So I think with this one, it's kind of a wash as to which you prefer. I think right now, we've been seeing a lot more Forbidden Alchemy because it's a little bit faster,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got a turn 5 combo deck in the format. So this just lets you have a little bit more game against Drake. Next up, Think Twice and Accumulated Knowledge. Two similar cards that both see play in teachings as well.
Think Twice better. Accumulated knowledge not good. Next, just kidding.
All right. So this one actually has some nuance to it. So Accumulated Knowledge is 1 and a blue, draw a card, then draw a card for each other copy of Accumulated Knowledge in your graveyard.
All graveyards.
Oh, in all graveyards. Sorry,
Yes.
That is important. That is very relevant. Think Twice, on the other hand, is 1 and a blue, draw a card, flashback, 2 and a blue.
Right. And so the people who like accumulated knowledge argue that over the course of the game, you will draw more cards with accumulated knowledge than you would with Think Twice.
All right. So
which is true.
Yeah.
Technically, that is true.
Let's break this down a little bit. So Think Twice, you're going to draw 8 cards if you resolve every copy of it. With Accumulated Knowledge, if your graveyard stays intact, you're going to draw 10 cards. That's more cards. You're spending 8 mana versus 20. Now, the interesting thing is when Graveyard Hate gets involved. If your opponent pulls in Graveyard Hate and they nuke your graveyard after you cast the first one of these spells, you've drawn 1 from each of them, right? With AK, you're going to get another 1, 2, 3. So you're going to get 7 total. With Think Twice, you're going to get 3 more uses. Or 3 more copies, 2 uses each. That's 6 cards as well. You're dead even on that. As if they can exile 1 copy from your bin, it doesn't matter which one you're playing, you're still drawing the same amount of cards. If you have the mana up, you can actually flash back Think Twice in response to them exiling your graveyard and actually still just draw the full 8 as well. So the other thing is Accumulated Knowledge does count both graveyards. So Adrian, how do you play Accumulated Knowledge if your opponent has it in their deck as well?
You don't want to play them until after your opponent's played theirs.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that's sometimes right. If you really need to dig for an answer right now and your only option is AK, you fire it off. Like it's a more complicated card to play with in the mirror.
I am personally in the Think Twice camp. I think it's the better card. I think it's a lot more flexible.
Yeah.
I don't like having to commit that many spells to my graveyard for something to be good.
Yeah.
You know, so I think Think Twice is the better card just in general.
And I mean,
if you live in some sort of weird world where Graveyard Hate is not a thing in your popular metagame, then by all means run Accumulated Knowledge.
Also, the kind of deck that you're looking to put this in does matter a bit. Like in teachings, I think you have more of a reason to go into the Think Twice camp, just because you're a draw go style deck, right?
Mm-hmm.
In something like Angler Delver, where you run a fairly low land count and you're self-milling a lot, Accumulated Knowledge is sometimes better in those sorts of decks because you just want to spend the 2 to get at least a card. You don't really want to be spending 5 to get 2 cards.
All right, that makes sense.
And also of note, it was in Turbo Fog as well, because with that you just care about volume.
Right.
But definitely an interesting one that I see asked a lot about teachings is like Think Twice or AK. And
honestly, it's really whatever you think is better. This argument can go on till the cows come home, basically. But you're either in the Think Twice camp or you're in the AK camp.
And I don't think either one of them is right all the time.
Right.
I think some of them are right some of the time.
I just happen to think Twice is right more of the time.
Fair. Moving on, removal. Edict effects. Let's do this.
Here we have Diabolic versus Chainers versus Geths. I think we can safely say that Geths is probably only played in mono black.
Yep. So to review, Diabolic Edict, instant 1 and a black, target player sacks creature. Chainers, 1 and a black, sorcery, target player sacks creature. Flashback 5 and 2 black.
Yeah.
And then Geth's Verdict, 2 black, target player sacrifices a creature and loses a life.
Right.
So yeah, Geth's Verdict definitely is the one that goes in mono black I don't think I've ever seen it outside of that deck.
Yeah, I just think it's too hard for other decks to cast, especially when they have access to Diabolic and Chainers, and the 1 point of life is not. I mean, it's better in mono black because, like, yeah, you get the incidental life loss, but I don't think most of the time that's really that relevant.
And so that kind of leaves us with Diabolic and Chainers. The big difference there being, is sorcery speed worth a second use?
And people, this is a real argument. Chainers is sort of ubiquitous with the format. Like, it's one of the best removal spells we have. Lots of decks run it. It's extremely good. In the current meta, it's suffering, obviously, because Drake can combo in 1 turn.
Yep. And you need to be able to interact on that turn.
Right. And even then, they'll normally have multiple creatures out. So even then, it's a little debatable whether or not it's good. Whereas Diabolic...
it's instant speed.
Yeah, it's instant speed.
Yeah.
So I think really it goes into like sort of the AK versus think twice question. Diabolic goes better in teaching decks that can tutor for it. Like there, it's really good. Whereas Chainer's Edict goes better in much grindier decks.
Yeah,
that will make use of the second. Will be able to leverage the second use.
Yeah, that's the big thing. You got to say to yourself, am I going to get to 7 mana consistently, and do I want to be at 7 mana? Like, a control deck wants to be there. Like, sure, sometimes aggro decks get stalled out, but you really don't want to be like, if you're on a black X aggro deck, do you really want to be in that position where you're like, well, I guess now I can flashback Chainers?
And in a black X aggro deck, I would also argue that they're not going to be running edicts at all. They're probably going to be running some sort of targeted removal or some sort of way. Like I think Snuff Out would be much better in a mono black aggro deck.
Yeah, or just a black X aggro deck.
Yeah.
I think the big thing is right now Chainers feels a little less good ever since we kind of shifted to be more of an instant speed format. And I think it's the better card. I'll be honest. I think most of the time Chainers is just the better card.
Yeah.
I think right now Diabolic is kind of where you want to be. Also, Chainers really lines up well against hand hate. It also lines up well against if you're self-milling for whatever reason.
Yeah. Chainers is an extremely good card, and I don't think it's really going anywhere. Diabolic, it just should get some special mentions because it's also a good card. Although I think some of the other cards we've talked about here, they just go into 2 different styles of black control decks.
Next up, more black control cards. Hand hate, actually. So Duress, Ostracize, and Distress. So let me go through these one by one and make sure I remember them. Duress, 1 black sorcery. Your opponent target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land, non-creature spell. Right. Or non-land, non-creature card, excuse me. Ostracize, target player reveals their hand. You choose a creature card. They discard it. And Distress is 2 black for a sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. Choose a non-land card from it.
Is Ostracize a common?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was an uncommon.
It was printed at common, I believe, in its original printing.
Oh, okay, that's why.
All right, so obviously one of these cards is much more well-known than the others.
Yeah, Duress is awesome. It goes into a lot of decks. Turns out there's a lot of really relevant non-creature, non-land cards to get rid of in our format. Ostracize, not really a lot of play, and I think that mostly has to do with the way that black decks answer creatures better than they answer spells.
Yep, definitely. Especially in a mono black deck where you could be running 12 to 16 pieces of removal easily.
Right.
You don't really care that much about getting the creatures out of their hand.
And I've only seen 1 or 2 decks play Distress. BB is rough, especially when you could just play Wrench Mind or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think I prefer this over Wrench Mind in some situations because it does let you pick what you're discarding, and Wrench Mind is usually getting either A, an artifact, or B, the worst 2 cards out of their hand. And I feel like I'm personally more in the camp of I'd rather get the 1 best card than their 2 worst. Still, 2 black is real. That's a very real cost to pay, right?
Yeah.
Just not being able to get rid of a turn 1 relevant thing is kind of important, I feel.
Right.
Anything else on this one? I feel like that one's pretty dry and shot.
Duress, yeah, like you said, like Duress is awesome against burn in a way that I don't know if Distress would be.
I mean, I think the only time I wouldn't at least consider bringing in Duress from the sideboard is probably like white decks.
I wouldn't bring it in. I mean, I don't know. There are some hands that Affinity has where Duress is really good, and then some that are like it's really bad.
Yeah, I guess I could see that as well.
Duress is a card that I have problems boarding in because I just don't ever know what to bring it in against, and so maybe I should start bringing against everything like you are.
I definitely I will admit I overboard Duresses a lot of the time.
It's a sweet card.
Yeah.
Well, it's also like if you Duress and they counter your Duress, you're like, well, I guess I was Duressing that counter spell,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also, the amount of information you get from your opponent's hand is non-negligible.
Right.
Like, being able to see what their first few turns are probably going to look like, and being able to, like, pull out, like, an early filter spell or something, or being able to get rid of an early threat that you can't deal with otherwise is really, really useful. Next up, we got Mana Rocks. We got Prophetic Prism, which is pretty ubiquitous. 2 generic. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, tap one generic and tap, add a mana of any color to your mana pool. Just filters into other filters mana into mana of other colors. You get a card when it comes into play. Then we've got Prismatic Lens, also 2 generic. When it enters the battlefield, it does nothing, but it has the same filter ability. But in addition, it also taps for a generic colorless itself.
Right.
So, this one actually ramps you versus just fixing your mana. Then the last one is actually 10 cards. And I kind of cheated here. It's the Signets.
Sounds like a band name, the Signets.
It might be. I feel like that's got a certain 60s aesthetic to it. Someone and the Signets.
No, I was just thinking about for like a doom sludge band.
The Signets.
Like it's a reference to the 7 sigils that are broken during Revelations. Like, come on, I'm trying to get back on Mike's good side here.
Yeah. Are you saying you're trying to get down with the Signets?
Yeah.
But the Signets are from the original Ravnica block. There's one for each guild, so each 2-color pair. Each one of them is 2 colorless. You pay 1, you tap it, you get the 2 colors of mana associated with the guild. So Azorius adds a blue and a white. Rakdos adds a black and a red.
What's Golgari do?
It adds a black and a green, believe it or not. Oh, just you tried to curry some favor,
and then I immediately squandered it.
But okay, so Prophetic Prism is definitely one of these you see the most, right?
Right, drawing the card is so huge.
Especially if you can reuse it, like flickering it, or
Right. The lens is interesting.
It used to be in Tron.
And I could see that just because it ramps, and they probably want that a little bit more than the card draw.
Well, I mean, so if you have the natural Tron in hand, this could be the 8th mana, so you get the turn 3 Crusher. Like you go land, tap for a sphere or something. Second land, tap them, put out the Prismatic Lens. Third turn, lay your last piece of Tron, 8 mana.
Crusher, yeah. So that makes a little bit more sense to me. But I think in other decks that are playing, these effects, I think they almost always want Prophetic Prism instead.
Yeah, and the Signets are kind of a weird one where in a deck that wants a lot of colors, like let's say Affinity, because Affinity runs Prophetic Prism.
Mm-hmm.
You would never run the Signets because the idea of like your Signets mismatching with what you have to cast is terrible.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think, honestly, the Is It one would be the best one.
The Is It one, I could see the Dimir one as well, just because like a blue-black control deck might want the little bit of ramp you get from it.
But yeah, just this rock that taps for 2 colored mana is just not really in high demand.
And I'm sure it also like sometimes lines up poorly, like where you just don't have, you're trying to hit a more stringent mana cost and it just doesn't quite get there.
Right.
I've definitely seen the Azorius Signet in assorted like blue-white Tron builds, like the Rhystic Tron deck.
Yeah, that makes more sense too because I think their colored mana is a little bit more of a premium.
Yeah.
in those style of decks.
And the ramp again is important. Like just being able to like get a little bit more mana out of your lands is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're probably going to go with Prophetic Prism. It's the most played out of the 3/12 for a reason.
Yeah.
Next up, we got a good one. 1 mana blue cantrips.
Ponder v Preordain v Brainstorm.
Well, I think Ponder's the best out of these.
Yeah, I think Ponder is probably the best. I'm sure everyone knows, but just for the sake of recap, Ponder is you look at the top 3 cards of your library, put them back in any order. You may shuffle, then you draw a card, regardless of whether or not you shuffle. Preordain is scry 2, draw a card, and Brainstorm is look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 2 back in any order.
All right, I'm just going to toss something out there. Did you know that Ponder is actually a riff on an old spell from Ice Age? It's called Portent.
Yeah, I was about to say that I know it's really terrible because you don't get the card till like the next turn or something.
Well, so it does the exact same thing as Ponder, except the card draw is delayed to the next upkeep. The next upkeep, not your next upkeep. The next upkeep. And you can also do it to your opponent.
Huh.
Yeah, weird.
Interesting.
But in the great scheme of things, Ponder.
Why? Why would you ever do that to your...
I don't know. So you'll also note that we left off a couple of the blue cantrips. These 3 are really the ones that are best in this format.
Yeah, no one is playing Serum Visions and Pauper.
No one's playing Opt. No one's playing Peak. No one's playing, Sleight of Hand.
I mean, there's Gataxian Probe. That almost doesn't count.
I would argue that Gataxian Probe is a completely different monster.
Yeah, it's yeah.
But out of these 3, Brainstorm's the trickiest because our fetches are ETB tapped,
Yeah,
right?
and everyone should know our opinions on Brainstorm by now.
Yeah, Brainstorm is definitely the most narrow of them. You can combo it pretty well with Mental Note and Thought Scour, which Angler Delver often does. Mm-hmm. So Preordain is definitely a close second to Ponder.
So what's interesting too is I feel like most of the Drake lists run Preordain over Ponder.
Well, so I think with Drake, you just want to get like cards that are dead at the moment out of the way, rather than risking a shuffle working out in your favor or not.
Right.
Ponder's definitely more the I want to dig 3 cards deep.
Yeah, Ponder lets you see more cards, and then if you don't like them, you can get rid of them, which is pretty huge.
I mean, you can get rid of them with Preordain as well. Just
you don't get to see all 3 though.
Yeah, I definitely think they go in different decks, but Ponder is probably the most powerful out of the 3.
Yeah, Ponder also actually, and this doesn't really get talked about a lot in Pauper, but is definitely more common in Legacy or even Vintage. You can Ponder, take the top card, and then use a fetch land to shuffle the other 2 away if you didn't like them.
Yeah. If you've got a shuffle effect, you can definitely do the Ponder, get 1, maybe even 2 if you need the top 2, and then shuffle away the last dead card.
And that comes up not very often. The most popular decks, I mean, it could come up, I guess, in Is It Blitz, which I believe does play Ponder. Delver, of course, plays Ponder and Preordain and plays 4 copies of each.
Yep.
Just because it's the blue cantrip deck.
But that's definitely an interesting one. I think Brainstorm is the most narrow and the one that you're going to consider after the other 2.
Yeah. And unless you're a deck that's somehow trying to leverage Brainstorm with fetch lands or something. I'm thinking specifically of the 5-color Domain Zoo deck, just because that's been a menace in our local meta.
Yeah. I mean, the player who's running it, Alex, is also running Squadron Hawks, which, oh boy, Brainstorm, after you've got the Hawks, put 2 of them back, cast another one, get them back. It's just draw 3.
But it's draw 3 Squadron Hawks.
No, because you draw the 3 and then you put back your 2 Squadron Hawks. So you're actually just ripping 3 cards and then getting the other 2 Hawks back. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, I see.
It actually is just, I'm not going to say it's Ancestral Recall, but it does an okay impression of it, right?
Right.
Next up, I'm going to let you take this one because it's an affinity thing.
Oh, yeah. It's Fling versus Teamer Battle Rage.
Specifically in the context of affinity.
Specifically, obviously, in other decks, it's Teamer Battle Rage. But in Affinity, there are some lists that run Fling. There are some lists that run Teamer Battle Rage. I personally am a bigger champion of Fling because you can win outside of combat with it. just the other day, in fact, when I comboed my opponent in response to his fling with my fling, Teamer Battle Rage could not have done that. That being said, Teamer Battle Rage is much less all in. So you have to sacrifice way less things to ATOG to win with a Teamer Battle Rage. So I understand why people do it. I've personally tried it though, and I have been every time I had the Teamer Battle Rage, I'm like, I could have just won with the fling here.
You never had the moment where you're like, man, this fling would be so much better as Battle Rage.
Yeah, it's never happened because your ATOG still dies to removal. Fling is better. If they counter either one, you're probably still going to lose the game. So that doesn't really matter. If they have a Hydroblast for it, it doesn't really matter. You know, there are just so many cases where the Battle Rage doesn't actually matter where the fling would have. The only thing I can think of is that you don't go as all in with the Battle Rage.
Yeah.
But and you can use it on other cards, so you could use it. You could use it on any of your 4/4s, and it's still fine.
Yeah, I mean, you could use Battle Rage on any of your 4/4s as well.
Well, that's what I meant. Yeah, you could, and then they become 8/8s, or they become 8/4. You know,
8/4 is the first strike and trample.
Yeah, they become big, large, and beefy, and they double strike.
How much do you think people are just tossing it in there because I imagine almost every game you have Ferocious active, right?
You would have to be doing pretty bad to not, because that means that you had no Mirror Enforcers, no Carapace Forgers, no Gear Seeker Serpents. You'd have to be doing pretty bad.
As a slight aside, how's Gear Seeker been working out for you?
Card is definitely gas.
There
are so many games where you play it on turn 3, and you're like, oh, I have a turn 3, 5, 6. Good luck.
Next up, actually, we should have covered this one earlier. Victim of Night, Doomblade, and Murder. These are all black targeted removal with varying levels of efficacy. So Victim is a non-vampire, non-werewolf, non-zombie creature for 2 black instant.
BB.
Doomblade, 1 and a black, destroy target non-black creature. And Murder is 1 and 2 black, destroy target creature. There is no other text on the card, and it's got a really nice aesthetic to it, which I really love. But it is 1 more. So
you didn't put Terror on this list, Mike.
I did not put Terror on this list, which
Terror is worse than Doomblade.
It is strictly worse than Doomblade.
The art is better though.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really kind of want to get a set of Doomblades altered to have the Terror art on them, because I think that is that is iconic art from when I started playing the game.
I don't think you're allowed to do that, Mike. I think that's actually one of the rules.
I think you're correct, but or at least an altar where the angel kind of looks like the weird bunny thing on Terror or whatever the hell it is.
I think it's a naked cowering man. I don't think it's a bunny.
He's super wrinkled. I think it's supposed to be the Vizardrix, that weird bunny piranha hybrid.
I thought it was just a cowering man. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked here. Victim of Night is the most played by Mono Black. BB doesn't really matter to them, and it is the only one that is good in the mirror. Well, I guess Murder is good in the mirror. Doomblade, obviously terrible in the mirror, but they can at least kill some things with Victim.
Well, actually, Victim does not hit a lot of the big cards in Mono Black.
It cannot kill Angler, and it cannot kill Great Merchant, but it can kill Rats, it can kill Rager, it can kill...
And that's actually one of the reasons why Angler has been so good in this format. There's very little removal that kills it.
Yeah.
Before, Victim was great because you were rarely whiffing on it. Now Angler gets played in a decent amount of decks, and it's definitely become a pillar of the format.
Angler's a good card.
Yeah, but Doomblade doesn't hit it anymore than Victim does, and Murder, the 3 mana in Mono Black at least, is already way too crowded. You already have so many 3-drops in that deck. You don't want to use it on targeted removal.
So many Gray Ogres.
So many Gray Ogres with upsides. Next up, we got Daze and Force Spike. Do you want to toss Mana Tithe in here as well?
No.
It
doesn't. It's not blue. I mean, I guess you could.
So Force Spike.
Not really though.
Force Spike, 1 blue, instant, counterspell unless its controller pays 1. Daze, 1 and a blue, counter target spell, instant counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. But you can bounce an island to your hand instead of paying its mana cost.
And so the reason that I included this is because it's Daze is awesome because it's free, right? That's no one's going to argue about that. Force Spike is for those of us who are a little bit more budget conscious, as well as there are times where bouncing the land is actually not good, just because if you're down, if you know,
It sets you back on tempo, right?
If you play nothing on turn one and you just have up island, untapped island, and you bounce that, you've wasted a turn. And it also is a non-bow with your Spire Golems.
Yeah.
So, like, that's really the only reason. Force Spike, you can also put into decks that are just running blue. You know,
yeah. That's a very relevant thing to bring up. Like, in, for example, Legacy, where Daze does see play, all your duels are islands, or at least a good portion of them are. And you can bounce any land, versus here you got to be running actual islands. So I think that is a very like salient thing to bring up here.
Right, because otherwise Daze is a 2-mana Force Spike, and that's terrible.
Yeah. That's mana leak mana.
Yeah, exactly. And I would argue, I mean, I have opinions about mana leak, but anyway, you know, like they do the exact same thing, and on the surface it would seem that Daze is miles and miles ahead just because by virtue of the fact that it's free. But I would argue that there are certain cases where the Force Spike is the more desirable spell.
And as you mentioned, budget is a thing. I don't know where Daze is now price wise. It used to be $25.
Yeah, it used to be
online.
Absurd.
And it's like $4 in paper. Like, it's not cheap in either realm. But it is really good. And if your opponent sees one Daze, they kind of have to at some point just either play a turn behind or assume that their spells are at risk of getting countered for free.
I'm of the camp where if you know your opponent has Daze, you just gotta sort of play into it. Like, I don't know.
I mean, you're also playing a deck where you cast a lot of your creatures for free. So
yeah, that's true. Daze this free Frogmite.
Yeah, I feel like
I do not care.
Yeah, you don't care. Rounding stuff out here because we're getting a little late in the episode here. This is a recent one. Both of these cards are fairly new. Tormenting Voice and Cathartic Reunion. Now, both of these are red draw spells. They both cost 1 and a red. They're both sorceries. The difference is Tormenting Voice is as an additional cost to play Tormenting Voice, discard a card from your hand. You draw 2 cards. And Cathartic Reunion is, as an additional cost to pay Cathartic Reunion, discard 2 cards, draw 3.
So I don't really know where Cathartic Reunion is in Pauper. Are people playing it?
I've seen it in the Rakdos Reanimator list.
And that makes a lot of sense because with that, you can pitch both the threat and the haste aura. So, like, that's really good.
And it digs you 3 cards deep, which is ridiculous for red.
Right. Like, this is, is there a reason why Cathartic Reunion is not a strict upgrade over Tormenting Voice?
Yes.
Tell me what it is, because I actually honestly don't know.
What happens if you don't have 2 cards in hand?
Oh, you got me.
Yeah.
All right, that's a thing.
That is the downside. And it does, for example, in a deck that's only red, like a mono red deck that would run this, I think you'd take Tormenting Voice every time because you're more likely to have 1 card in hand than you are to have 2.
Right.
And you really don't want to be like sandbagging lands just so that you can, Cathartic Reunion, especially in a format where Chittering Rats is a thing.
Right.
Like, you don't want to get time walked here. Cathartic Reunion is definitely powerful, though. Like, we were talking before the show, the foils of Cathartic Reunion are like $5 because of Modern Dredge, where it's just absurd. It is really powerful, and I think that there might be a blue-red control deck in the future that wants this. Like, being able to, like, get rid of stuff that's not relevant now to draw 3 cards.
Yeah.
Seems really good, especially if you're backed up by, like
oh, you can discard, like, Deep Analysis.
Yeah, you can discard flashback spells with it. You can, just pitch extra lands you don't need. But like, I don't know. I can just see a situation where you've got like Cathartic Reunion and Muldrifter in hand when you're going into the late game. Muldrifter, draw 2, Cathartic Reunion. If you don't like the cards, get another 3 cards to look at.
Mm-hmm.
They're both very powerful draw spells when it comes to red. I don't think either of them are in the same camp as Faithless Looting, because Faithless Looting is actually draw then discard.
Right, so you could draw another combo pieces and then pitch them. Faithless Looting also will get you 4 cards total.
Yes.
So across the 2 castings.
Well, lets you see 4 cards because
Right.
you're actually losing. It's actually card disadvantage the first time,
Right.
but the second time it's pretty much it's neutral.
Wait, how is a card you draw 2, you discard 2?
Yeah, and you
you
spend a card to
okay,
do that.
okay,
There you go. We're connecting the pieces here.
I'm sick. Mike is bullying me.
But yeah, so there's a lot of these cases in Pauper, and I'm sure there are ones we will get told that we missed. I'm sure of it.
I mean, we were just, yeah.
These were just the ones that we wanted to talk about, and if enough people say like, hey, there's other examples of this, maybe we return to this at a later date. But it's definitely always good to be aware that there's another version of an effect you want to put in your deck,
right?
So that you can analyze, do I actually want version 1 or do I want version 2?
And for everyone who's out there thinking it, take inventory is not comparable because of sorcery. Get that out of your head right now. Take inventory, a thing.
I totally forgot about take inventory.
Yeah, because it's not a thing.
Take inventory, for those who don't pay attention to standard, is accumulated knowledge.
As a sorcery,
but it only counts your graveyard. That means you're not giving your opponent value off.
Whatever.
You're not giving your opponent value off of it because they're probably playing accumulated knowledge if they're playing one of these effects.
Your opponent is not playing take inventory because they know it's not as good as accumulated knowledge. There you go.
Yeah, we got there.
We got there. So real quick before we do our outro here, next episode is our half-anniversary. It's our unanniversary, I guess you could call it.
So it'll be episode 25, also a landmark.
That means that you have probably been listening to us for 25 weeks, 26 weeks actually, technically. We missed a week.
We missed a week for the stream of the Rags to Riches, correct?
Correct.
All right. So next week is also, the weekend of Halloween. So we're going to try and throw together something that's, a little bit thematic for the season.
The Color Commentary Halloween Spooptacular, as it will be known. But yeah, we just want to, going into that, thank you guys for listening to us for so long. It means a lot. I certainly didn't think we were going to be doing this 26 weeks later. So.
And more importantly, more people listening to us every week. Like, our numbers have been consistently improving. Thank you for, spreading the word about our podcast, getting it out there.
It means a lot to us. You are the greatest fans ever. I said it. You're better than Share fans. You're better than Moby fans. I'm just naming artists that I think people like.
Moby hasn't released anything in like 6 or 7 years.
Well, then, you'll have to wait less time for the next episode of Color Commentary than you will for the next Moby album.
There you go. But yeah, definitely thanks, everyone. The support's been great. This is not like a send-off. We're going to keep doing this. Like, we don't have any better way to fill our Sunday.
We're probably also going to talk about this next week, too. I just got I jumped the gun a little. Sorry, Mike.
You got a little excited. I can't blame you. All right. I'm going to take us out.
On a date.
What?
Nothing. Go
on. That's all we got for today. Thanks to Pat's Games for giving us a place to play weekly Pauper, even if my co-host doesn't show up. And thanks to L for the use of his song Quantitative as our theme music. His music can be found on SoundCloud under the name LLL. Remember to subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. We're also on iTunes, and if you subscribe there, please leave an iTunes review. It really helps us out. If you have an idea for a discussion topic or a deck list you want us to discuss, you can either use the contact form on our website or email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. For those of you who have actually done that, I do read your emails. We are going to get to some of your content. It's in the queue. I'm Michael Petchek.
I'm Adrian Gonzalez.
Signing off for Color Commentary. It's getting left in.